Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Career Event Series. Today is the first part, Resume for the Virtual World workshop. I'm Ananya Ghosh, Application Development Engineer at Foster, member of Young Professionals Committee in SPE. I'm co-joined today, or co-hosting with Erin Keeney and Adam Cohn. I'll let them introduce themselves later, but today we have three experts from the industry who are going to give you stellar tips to make your resume stand out in the sea of applicants. Erin, go ahead.
So I'm Erin Keeney. I will be helping you coordinate the agenda today. So first we want to have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we will take the second half of the hour to break into rooms where you can really focus with one of the panelists on getting your questions answered about your resume and looking at example resumes so that you can get good feedback to bring to yours.
Adam, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Adam. I'll be in the breakout room with Rodney Jocelyn to help coordinate that one, and that will be for the 5+ years of experience for those who wanted to be in that room for the discussion. And I'm excited for today's talk.
We'll start with Rodney. Rodney, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rodney Jocelyn. I work at T Connectivity. Started there in 2004. I'm currently a strategic sourcing responsible for all new mold purchases for North America Automotive. I've worked in the plastics industry since 1984, so that's about 37 years. I don't know if anybody on this call is even that old, but I started out of high school as a journeyman mold maker and actually went to college as a non-traditional student, receiving my degrees in 2001 and 2009. And then I worked my way through various roles at T Connectivity since joining them.
Rodney will be leading our professionals track today for participants who are interested in knowing key insights, who are present in the industry for more than 5 years, or otherwise are just interested to know tips from Rodney. Our second panelist will be Alex Jordan, who's assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin Plastics Engineering Department. Alex, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ananya. Like I said, I'm an assistant professor at University of Wisconsin in plastics engineering. This is my 4th year as a faculty member. Before that, I did a fellowship at Minnesota and did my undergrad and graduate degrees at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. I've been on multiple search and screen committees. We actually have one going on right now. That's the meeting I was in right before this. And I'm having another one right after this. So having been a professor in 4 years, I've actually been part of hiring 7 other professors already. So I'd like to think I've looked at a lot of resumes and can hopefully provide you some helpful tips. I guess my key tip for any type of academic resume would be to make things easy to find. Knowing that we get 100+ applicants for each job opening that we have to screen through, the easier it is to find the key information on your resume, the better chance you have of moving on in the hiring process.
Great. And our third panelist is Marcela Linares, who's the Market Development Manager at Foster Corporation. Marcela will be leading our Young Professionals track today. Marcela, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Marcela Linares. As Ananya mentioned, I'm currently the Market Development Manager at Foster Corporation, and previously I was the Applications Development Engineer Manager for the same company. I've been in the plastics industry for more than 10 years since I graduated back in my home country, Venezuela, I worked there, and then I came to the US to pursue my master's degrees, and I have a background in plastics engineering and technological entrepreneurship as well. And I'm excited to help you figure out what you want to do with your careers when you're starting. So let's make this happen and be magical today.
Yes, and during any time during the event, if you have questions, please feel free to type it out in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure your questions are passed to the panelist. Erin, do you want to go ahead and kick the event off?
Sure. So we would love to start with the questions that we've compiled, but of course, please in the chat, put any questions that you have for the audience, and feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself to ask questions as well. The first question we have is, actually, do you want to kick off the first question, Ananya?
Yeah.
Thank you.
My first question for, I think Alex already covered it, but for Rodney and Marcela, what would you say are your most key tip for resume? Like what is the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about resumes?
Rodney, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I think a key tip for me is to make sure your resume fits the job you're applying for. It's very critical that that your resume is actually geared towards what you're applying for, because if it's showing something different in your background, it's going to get tossed out right away. So that's my key tip.
Yeah, and my key tip, besides what Rodney mentioned, is be honest. Make sure that everything that you're putting in really matches who you are and your experience, because if not, it will show eventually. And this is my pet peeve with resumes. The goal of a resume is to get you the interview. So don't overthink it and don't underthink it. Make sure that your resume is going to give you the best chances of get that interview for the job you want.
That's very interesting. Honesty. That's a key tip for all our participants. Very important to stick to it. So my first question, apart from key tips, is for Alex. What is the first thing you notice when you look at a resume?
So at least from
because
from
an
the
academic CV is like full of details, I believe.
So the first thing I look at is whether you have gotten funding in the past for any of your work. Publications are important, but that's just something you're expected to have. Funding is what sets you apart from other candidates. So that's honestly the first thing I look at. The second thing I look at is where you did your doctoral work and who you did it with. After that, I'm mostly looking for what areas you specialize in. Because when we hire someone in academia, we're basically hoping we can make a 30 to 40 year commitment for you working with us. And like Rodney said, we're looking for things very specific. So if you are mechanical design, you could be a fantastic candidate. But if what we're really looking for is a fluid flow, thermal fluid science type person who's going to do dye design, sorry, we don't even move you on after that. So it's really funding, who you worked with in the past, and do you have the expertise we're looking for?
Do you accept resumes and kind of keep them in a backlog if you have candidates that might be good for a future position, or is it all one and done?
So from the, I can answer it from the state university perspective and say we're not allowed to do that.
Okay.
So we can keep people in mind for the future, but they still have to continue applying for the open positions as they come up.
And
And
Aaron,
if
Is that
I could,
different for other industries?
yeah, if I could jump in, Aaron, I know from our side, my company in particular, we're a global company with a lot of different business units, and we have a lot of involvement in a lot of different areas of the industry, not only plastics, but cable and wire and fiber optics and everything. So if somebody's applying and it doesn't fit the position we are specifically hiring for, we have a huge human resources department that can look across the board and see if there's other positions that, you know, that might fit better for that candidate.
Great.
My second question is for Marcela. How do you present yourself when you don't have a lot of experience?
I think in general, even when you actually have the experience, the most important thing is to make sure that you're showing skills that are transferable. So maybe you have experience in an area that is not necessarily the one that you're looking for, but there are always skills that you can transfer from one job to the other, or from one stage in your career to the other. So if you don't have the experience in the actual required job, that doesn't, at least in our case, necessarily disqualify you automatically, because we wanna make sure that the people that we're hire are gonna be a good fit for our team, are gonna be able to fit the culture of the company, are gonna be able to learn. So there's the knowledge you can teach. You can send your employee to a training and teach them what they don't know yet. But the attitude, the teamwork, how capable are you to adapt and to integrate into the culture of the company? Those are things that we want to see. So showing examples or mentioning examples of times where you've been able to achieve this can help you still get to the second stage.
That's very true. This is something that, if I can add, not the panelists, but I'll still add, that a lot of times fresh graduates think that they don't have experience, but what they don't realize, their research, their lab works itself adds to some sort of experience in their career. So please remember that and use it as a key point. My third question is to Rodney. What's your take on creative resumes, like a video resume?
Yeah, I find it interesting you're asking the old guy on the panel about new technology. That's honestly, I've got to say, I've never seen a video resume, so I don't know how well I could answer this. Anybody else on the panel may be able to chime in on that, but I will say that my company, you know, most of our applications come through an online portal, which allows a download of your resume, and I'm not even sure that we have the option for a video resume on that portal, but those resumes get provided to me through our human resources department. So I think that, you know, an outside the box resume that may include video could be good, but I would have concerns that it could reflect poorly on you. If, you know, you may be a fantastic person when it comes to what's the role that you're applying for, but maybe you can't speak very well, or maybe there's some kind of a little quirk in the video that would draw attention away from who you really are. And so I would hesitate to go that direction. But does anybody else on the panel have experience with that?
I actually do. We recently were hiring for a marketing position, and I think it depends on what the role is going to be, right? So if you're going to be a machine operator, a process engineer, or a creative person in a company, you got to show different skill set. And we had a person that applied that had a link to their website that had a video, and I would say it wasn't greatly done. So it actually took away from the skills that this person may have. So if you are going to be creative, make sure it's very well done.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I would add that, you know, being in the industry for 37 years, back in my day, getting creative was actually using parchment paper instead of just regular paper, because we actually used to. You didn't have the online portal to download stuff. We actually took resumes to the company and turned them in. So when we wanted to get creative, we used parchment paper, and then I actually remember when that kind of went out of favor, where it was, I don't know if I want to say frowned upon, but I think people like consistency to some degree.
Kind of leads me into something that seems to be a source of anxiety in the chat here, which is when you submit your resume cold to a company, either through LinkedIn or their website directly, and it goes through that HR process. There's a lot of AI involved typically now. I'm curious if that resonates with you, and how you can beat the system, if you will, to make sure that you have the right keywords and screening before person gets to see the resume.
Yeah, I called earlier this morning our HR manager to ask a few questions about this. And she was mentioning something that I had already in mind to mention, that you have to understand what the hiring process is. So if you are applying directly to a company's portal specifically, there's a certain process, and that's different than if you use job searcher engine like Indeed, for example. Or it's different if you submit your resume on LinkedIn. So you have to understand what the hiring process is and what tools they're using. And the easiest way to know is, how do you apply to the job? Where do you put your resume? So if you're putting your resume on Indeed, chances are companies are already providing a specific list of keywords that are required for that position. So you have to take the time to go see what the position requirements are, see what the job duties will be, and make sure that you're mentioning similar skills or similar interests on your resume. Otherwise, you'll basically be knocked out. If you're applying directly to a company, sending a resume to an HR person, sending a resume specific to that company through a different method, then chances are they are probably not using AI yet, because it depends also on the size of the company, and you don't want to rule out too many candidates if they don't have twin screw extrusion, for example, right? Because that's something that you can still learn. You can have processing instead and would be okay. But you gotta understand that you gotta capture that person's attention in the first 3 minutes. So you gotta make sure that your email is set up properly, because we received 50 emails for one position that we have to fill in 2 weeks. You don't have the time to go in depth. So even if you don't have the AI, we are already looking and hunting for things that make sense. It needs to make sense for the job, and it needs to make sense for the process. So you have to take the time to understand those two. That's my 2 cents.
And I guess I would just add from my side that, as far as my company, we've never had any issues with not getting applications. So typically people are always trying to get into my company. And so from a standpoint of looking for specific search terms, I think what you're probably going to find more often is headhunters that are going to be looking for that. The headhunters are going to be trying to reach out to get you to go through them to get positions, and they will use the AI to see what positions you're looking for.
Can I use that as an opportunity to ask how you all feel about headhunters in various industries?
They're almost non-existent in academia. Just with all of the logistics involved with changing jobs, it's not something a lot of people are willing to do.
From my side, I have more headhunters trying to get me than what I'm trying to get them. I am fortunate that we have a huge human resources department that is a big buffer between me and a lot of that may be going on.
Yeah, I think headhunters work great for big companies. Small and mid-sized companies, probably they miss on understanding the culture. And for small and mid-sized companies, fitting the culture is significant when you're hiring.
For the panelists, do you mind just describing what a headhunter is for those on the call who may not know?
Right. So a headhunter or a recruiter is basically a person or a company that searches for good candidates for specific applications or specific job descriptions. And what happens is that the HR department of a company will hire a company specifically to get them good candidates, and they will then screen a bunch, if not thousands, of either applicants or potential candidates. And the only easy way to do that is by using artificial intelligence, because you can't scroll and screen through thousands of resumes unless you use that. And they are also sometimes very aggressive, so they will email people.
Yeah, and a lot of
Yeah,
times,
sure.
you know, if they get hired to fill a certain role, especially if it's an upper level management position, they will be out looking for people that they feel, you know, fit the position, and they'll try to, you know, going through like LinkedIn and other platforms to identify you, and then aggressively go out and try to get you to see if you would be interested in taking on that position, and they're getting compensated for that service.
Yeah, most of the headhunters I deal with are trying to get my students' contact information. And like Rodney said, they can be very relentless.
Yeah.
We have some interesting question that I want to ask each and every panelist. A lot of times resumes have this objective statement. Do you think it's a great way of showing the personality, or do you think it's a waste of space, depending on what kind of position they're applying for?
So in terms of academic CVs, I would say it's a waste of space. It's pretty obvious that you want a faculty position, and that's why you're hiring. During the interview process is when we'll get to know your personality, because you're going to come out for a 3-day long interview. So for an academic CV, I would say it's a waste of space.
What about you, Rodney? For an experienced professional, 10, 20 years experience or more than 5, 6 years?
And I apologize, I don't believe I quite understood the question.
So a lot of times resumes have this first line at the top saying objective statement or summary. What do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, for, you know, one of the things that I realized as we were coming into this is a lot of what we are going to be talking about is personal preference. And what I may prefer definitely might not be what somebody else prefers. I actually like to have the objective. I've always had it on my own resume, but somebody else may absolutely disagree with that. So, and the problem is, or what the hard time you may have is you don't know who's going to get your resume, unless you have a personal insight or you know that person through some kind of contact. You're not really going to know who's going to be looking that over. And so if you send it to me, I'm going to like that, but I don't feel that that's a necessity. If I get a resume that doesn't have it, I'm not going to toss it out just because it's not there. So I think anybody that's hiring has to be willing to look at the overall, the entire resume, and not just, you know, be concerned about that one little portion that may not be there or may be there.
Noted. What about Marcela?
I think it depends on how you're using that space. So if your objective says find a job in the plastics industry, I mean, aren't we all here for that? That doesn't really say much about you. But if you have an objective, or even better, a summary of your skills that show who you are, I think that makes more sense. And as an interviewer, I would make sure that I ask questions to understand how getting this role will fit with your goals. Because it needs to, I don't want a person that gets a job and then they realize that's not what aligned with the goals that they had and leaves me in 6 months, because I already took the time to train them, or even a year. I took the time and the money to train that person to fit, and then we're back at square zero. So if you're going to use it, make sure you use it properly and make sure you can explain how getting that job will get you to achieve your goals.
So I think at this point, it would be interesting to hear what you typically expect for a length of resume, and if there's categories you like to see or don't like to see, including things like volunteer experience or extracurriculars. As well as, I'll add this in, we have in the chat, can you use all the plastic industry acronyms like TGA, DSC, all of those things, depending on what you're applying for. Anyone can run with that. I know I kind of did a lot of
I'll go ahead
questions.
and start with, with my side of this panel being older professionals with more experience. It can be difficult to keep it to one page. However, the normal is, or what is commonly understood is you should try to keep it to one page, but that's just not always the reality, because if you have a lot of years of experience, you can't fit that all onto one page. But it is important to summarize as much as possible. So you don't want to run your lines out with unnecessary words or unnecessary description. It can be brief. If you have enough experience and if you really fit that role and that person wants to interview you, when you get into that interview, that's the time to expand and bring more attention to areas that you might want to make sure that they're aware of extra stuff you might have done, but it's not on the resume that you want to do that.
Just to continue on the industrial side before Alex comes and tells us that he wants to see all the papers that a person published. I'm going to say that for entry-level positions, if you have a resume that's longer than one page, I'll be questioning why you have so many things, and are you naming things that are unnecessary, and what's your capability to be concise about what's relevant. So at least for less than 5 years of experience, you should be able to put your resume in one page. I personally always look for the skills section, or whatever they mention what their skills are, and for other interests, because we are hiring humans and we want to make sure that these people are also going to be happy and we get to know them and have a good relationship with our coworkers, and also because having other interests usually serves as an icebreaker to start a conversation. So you want to make sure that if you get that interview, you have a fluid conversation with the person, and just having their, oh, I love hiking, and then I can ask you, where was the last mountain you hiked to, could be an icebreaker and could start us on a good foot, whereas I have nowhere to start but to ask you, what did you do for your, I don't know, capstone project, right? So I personally look for the personal information because I'm hiring humans.
I'll just say that that's been very helpful for me in initial interviews, because I've tended to have things on the resume that resonate with other people in my volunteer experience. So that's always a great segue and icebreaker. Alex, do you want to comment on CV length?
So with one of the things with a faculty position is you are also asked to submit a lot of other things from your CV. So expect to submit a one-page long cover letter telling us how you're a good fit for the job. And I guess that is kind of like the objective statement from the last question. So about a one-page cover letter. You're also asked to submit a teaching philosophy statement. I would keep that to 2 pages. A lot of universities now want an equity and diversity statement. That should be a 1 to 2 page document. You'll need to submit a statement of research interests. They can be, we get them up to 15 pages, but I would say 10 pages is kind of where I stop being able to really focus. So I wouldn't go much more than that. And then in terms of the CV, they can get long. But I kind of like Rodney was saying, you have to summarize things. So it's perfectly acceptable to summarize the key things on the first 3 pages of a CV and then put other stuff in the appendix. You know, if you have 35 papers, maybe you only put 2 or 3, the key ones, in the first few pages and then have an appendix with the rest of them. And are we talking about other stuff we want to see in there, or?
Yeah, any other key sections that you look for? Yeah.
I already talked about funding, where your education was. It's also a good idea to highlight just in one quick section on your resume what proposed research areas you're going to get into if you're a successful applicant. So we make sure that it's not really duplicating something we already have.
Do your homework on the faculty webpage.
Yeah, especially before the interview too. Patents are important. A list of classes you think you could teach. And again, kind of screen the faculty page there. I can tell you the search and screen committee I'm on right now, someone applied and basically said they could teach my classes.
Like,
that person did not move on. We want to make sure that you're not, because faculty are expensive, so we want to make sure you're not duplicating an area we already have, but that you're filling an area we need. Yeah. And we do also, like, we want to see extracurriculars as they relate to your job. So what do you do above and beyond the base level of what you're expected?
Can I pull out one thread is for in the chat we have, can you use industry relevant acronyms without defining them because they can often take up a lot of space?
I'm okay with that if they are relevant. If I'm hiring for example, a lab technician or a quality engineer, and then they have experience with specific equipment or processes, that is fine. There's also no need to name exactly all the lab equipment that you've used. I mean, just say mechanical testing knowledge, and that should be enough. So that's how you learn to be more concise than just mentioning DSC, TGA, IV testing. You know, it's too much. Just tell me what type of testing you know how to do.
I see an interesting question in the chat which says, what if my application is rejected and right after the position shows up again? Shall I apply again? What do you have to say?
How much you want it?
But is that seen as a negative, or do you think that will bring attention to the desk, like the resume will come to the desk?
I think if you're going to reapply, you may want to update your resume, because if you were rejected for something, you may want to make sure that you tweak your resume better for that position. But I don't think it shows that you really want that position. So I don't think that's
I would say it may depend on the company that you're speaking about as well. You know, for example, my company being a global company with 80,000 employees, we have multiple positions. It's not just one person, you know, and we have multiple business units, and you know, I don't know that it's always clear whether it's the exact same position that you already applied for and were turned down for. It could be the same position by name, but it might be for a different manager, different department, may even be within the same department, but they needed more than one person.
Yeah.
hopefully, you would be a close enough candidate that if that were the case, and it was the same position, same manager, but they needed more than just one person, hopefully you would still be under consideration. But I agree with what you said. You may want to update or make any changes you feel would help you to take it to the next level and get there.
Just to add to it, I think a lot of times companies keep positions open even after a person is selected till they join. So there's like a 2-3 week waiting period while they still want to keep the position open until then. So it might happen that you've applied, but there's already a candidate selected who's about to join, and that's why the company is keeping the position open. When you see the position again, they might have another need. So it's not a bad idea to apply. Another thing I think is maybe you applied for the position, you got rejected because at that time in that pool, there were more qualified or more suited applicants than you.
Or
But
internal applicants, which you will never know about.
Never.
That's a good point.
right. But at the second time, in that pool of applicants, maybe you are the star. So it's never a bad idea to apply again.
I do want to note on that if it is the same job ID, normally in the email when they do decline your application, they will say you cannot reapply for this position. They do call that out in the email for most companies. If it's the same job,
Good to know.
yeah. It should say that. If it doesn't, I guess reapply and see what. The worst I could do is just say no. Right. Again.
True. That's the worst.
Yeah, but I think if the job requisition ID is exactly the same, then it is the same posting.
So we have another. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Aaron.
I think we're going to read the same one. So we have a question: when applying through the careers page of a company website, there's often an option for a cover letter. Do those actually get eyes on them? Are they a formality? And how much weight do people put in those? And what should you highlight in there if it's going to be something that is looked at?
Yeah, I'm gonna share a personal story. When I was a student looking for jobs, I applied to a big cosmetics company, and they requested a cover letter. And someone later, and then I didn't get that job, whatever, right? Someone at some point that I met after mentioned that what they do, big companies have artificial intelligence that reads only the cover letters, and if they don't have the keywords, they will just automatically dismiss the candidate. So if they are asking you for it, maybe they actually only read the cover letter first, because you get so many resumes. So it's just unfeasible to read them all. You need to have some sort of screening system, and for some companies, the cover letter is what it is. So pay attention to what you write. Pay attention to making sure that you use the keywords for the position, and that you show how you are a good fit for that company and how that company is a good fit for you as well.
I think just like summaries, cover letters also, if you're writing it, make sure it's unique and not like a generic 3-paragraph letter that you would write for every company or position that you apply to.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with that. Your cover letter, unless you are constantly applying for just the same position, my cover letter has been redone through the years when I have looked for other jobs. And fortunately, I love the company I'm at now, so I'm not actively looking. But years and years ago, when I did look, that cover letter got modified nearly every time I would apply, and that was because my cover letter would specifically, tell the company or state the company I was applying to, as well as the position I was applying for, and the reasons that I felt I fit that position. And I would at different times over my career, I've applied for various positions that were not always exactly the same. So
Rodney, quick
think
question.
That was a great outline. That was another question in the chat. So if you're looking to figure out what to put in a cover letter, do that. And if you have any people that you've talked to from the company, like state that. What network drove you to this company? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I had a question for Rodney before, and then I'll actually address your comment, Erin. When you're applying for an internal position, do you have to write the cover letter as well?
Internally,
Mhm.
no. I mean,
Okay.
I always provide a cover letter because I like that. It's once again going back to personal preference, but
All right.
internally, it depends. I guess it kind of depends also whether you know personally who's doing the hiring in the department. Like I said, we're a global company. If I were applying for a position in Germany, probably going to want to make sure that they know a little
Right.
more about me.
Right.
But if I'm applying for a position within TE Automotive, there's a good chance they're going to know who I am already. So hope that answers your question.
All right. Yeah, it does. So, and to address Erin's comment, I think you gotta be careful how you mention your previous network. You don't want it to sound like I'm pulling this string like a puppeteer. You maybe even want to make sure that instead of doing that, you on a different channel mention it to the person that you know that you have applied for the job, instead of putting it on your letter. And it's funny because I believe, then again, I'm going to share a personal experience here. When Anania joined our company, she had networked with the CEO of our company in advance, months before. And when we were talking about hiring her, we were talking with the CEO, and he's like, "Yep, she contacted me months ago, and we had a conversation about it." So it really is internally. You may not even ever know about these conversations, but internally, people do talk about, and you reach out. And I think it's smarter that if you have a network connection, to contact that person and tell them, "Hey, I'm applying for this job. Do you have any tips or any recommendations?" instead of mentioning it during your application.
And I agree with you, and I would add one other piece. My specific company, we actually our employees can recommend
Mhm.
for other people for positions. So that's where you really want to reach out to them. And I'll tell you, personal experience that I had probably 25 years ago or so. I was trying to get into General Electric and applied for a position there, and ended up I did not get selected, and ended up finding out from a person that I knew not well, but I knew them through other people that I did know well. And ultimately I was at a Thanksgiving. It was actually a holiday. I think it was Thanksgiving time. I know you don't like Thanksgiving. Let's call it Christmas then. But it was a Christmas event. And so I was in the same room as this particular person. And as we were talking, he said something about his work. And I said, yeah, I applied for a position, same plant that he was working at for General Electric. And he looked at me and said, if I would have known, I'd have got you hired. He said, all I would have had to do, he said he got 3 people. They were hiring a number of people at that time. And he got 3 people hired because all he did was walked in, took their resumes, put them to the top of the list and said, these are the people you want to hire. So, sometimes it's very important that you make sure that the people you know that you've networked with are aware that you're trying to get that position, for sure. That was a missed opportunity for me.
Good lesson to hear about ahead of time.
Although I will say, unfortunately, General Electric's volatile work force, they ended up having layoffs about 3 years later. So
you're better, Rodney.
Yeah. Sometimes sometimes you got to count your blessings the other way too. When you have a door shut, sometimes you just got to feel like there's a reason that happened. and your opportunity, don't give up, go to the next direction, find another door. But just because you missed that one, it doesn't mean that that was it may have been a blessing in disguise. So.
I saw Alex on mute. Did you want to add something?
My dog was just barking, so I muted.
Fair enough. We have one last question in the chat, and I'll give people another couple minutes to put anything else before we do our breakout room session. And we already have Adam answering in the chat from his point of view. But if you get to the point, especially for people who are right out of school, who are applying for a lot of jobs, doing a lot of interview process, if they get a job offer and they decide to decline it, do you welcome recommendations of peers that fit the same criteria and interests to look at new candidates?
I do. I do, because probably a candidate that I have not considered that would fit, especially after a person has gone through the whole interviewing process and the whole hiring process. They would know if one of their classmates or colleagues would be a better fit. So I do appreciate the recommendation.
I do as well.
And I think it's very different with a state employer. There are a lot of rules and regulations. So if that person didn't apply by the cutoff date, we'd have to make a new posting, go through the entire process again. So the likelihood that we would consider that person would be very, very small. And especially when it comes to faculty, it'd be almost non-existent. So I guess that was more a question for Rodney and Marcela.
Awesome. So we didn't have any questions come in, any new questions come in. So
I think we did miss one. Sorry,
Oh,
someone
did we?
did ask.
Okay.
Yeah, it was is it appropriate to ask for feedback if you're rejected? So if you do receive a rejection email, is it okay to ask for feedback as to why you were not selected?
So I think it's okay, but no one I know would ever answer an email like that. It's an HR minefield, so you can send the email, but don't expect to get a reply.
I've heard stories where people did actually get feedback and it helped them in their next position. It kind of depends on how much relationship back and forth you've had with the HR manager, but I don't think it can hurt. It can only help.
Yeah, the worst that can happen is that they don't answer. However, chances are that if you get an answer, it'll be the HR department answer, not the hiring manager's answer. So just keep that in mind, because it is a minefield. I agree.
Some companies do require, if you make it to like where I work, if you are one of the final candidates in the interview process, we're required to get feedback out of respect to the time that we used. So it helps. It's supposed to help you, at least you get some benefit out of it, even if you're not selected.
Nice.
I have a question which I think is important. If you decline a position after being offered, do you think, what are the chances if the person applies to another position in the same company within a span of few months or years? How do you feel about the candidate who you worked so hard interviewing, you offered a position, declined it?
I think it depends on the reason they decline, and who the person is and the kind of talent they have. So I'll take this opportunity to relay another personal situation. And this one, if you don't mind, Adam, this one's going to involve you trying very hard to get Adam to take a position. Adam used to work for my company, only he was over in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, which is a couple hours away, and trying very hard to get him into a role in Winston-Salem, which he would have been perfect for. And man, I tried hard and I could not convince him to take that position. And ultimately he declined taking the position and ended up doing better where he was at the time. And in the end, like I already said, sometimes things happen for a reason. And ultimately, Adam, you know, the doors have opened for you that I think you're happier than I've ever seen. So, you know, everything works for a reason. But if Adam came back and wanted that job, I would recommend him, and hopefully he would be hired with not a problem because of the talent.
Thanks, Rodney. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
For anyone who missed Adam's introduction, he's currently working in Nike. I think
The dream job.
That's a company everybody knows.
But I did work with Rodney. We worked at TE Connectivity in the same state, not in the same division for a little bit of time. Yeah, so I have a good working relationship with Rodney. And I think it's important is the working relationships. You want to make sure if you do leave a company that you keep those relationships strong.
Very important. But if you're talented and you're a good hard worker, ethical, you know, you make that reputation that will stay with you no matter what you do, no matter where you go.
Agreed.
Awesome.
What do you think, Alex? Do you want to also answer this question from an academic point of view? If someone, which is I think very rare, someone turning down position for professorship?
It depends an awful lot on why they declined. You know, did they apply for the position just to leverage you against someone else? Then that looks pretty bad, because it's a huge investment to bring anyone out for an interview in terms of time and money. And if you leave and want to come back, it, like Rodney said, it really depends on your personality and the circumstances you left under. You know, did you tell us in September that you were going to teach this year and then leave over the summer? And then
Yes.
3 years later, come back and want a job again? Or are you leaving 2 weeks before the semester starts? Now we have to scramble to cover for you. So it's so dependent on the person and the circumstances that the person's leaving under. And like you said, it's pretty rare that someone declines a faculty job offer.
I really like your statement about trying to leverage job opportunities. I would highly suggest against doing that. The larger industries now give you your verbal offer Friday afternoons now at 4 p.m. traditionally, and you have to accept Monday at 8 a.m. And it's not written, it's verbal, and they do that in order to make sure you don't leverage their offer against your current employer. So that's a common trend that's happening now. To keep that in mind for people trying to
in the
leverage.
academic world, it's a small enough community that we know each other. We know who's applying to jobs where. And if it gets back to the university you're working at that you're applying to transition, you can basically consider any type of current collaboration or equipment deals null and void with your colleagues. So I would really recommend against doing that if you go into academia.
Alex, how often is it that professors go from one university to the other? Like fully employed in one university to the other?
It used to be almost non-existent. I know of a few like my faculty advisor for my PhD moved from Case Western to Delaware. And I only know of a few other professors who have moved universities during their career.
In the US?
You got to think, yeah, in the US. You got to think of being a faculty member as like running your own small company, where you're responsible for doing a lot of the legwork in terms of raising the funds and building up equipment and training students. So the process of moving from one job to another is probably a 3-year prospect in terms of like the logistics of moving everything. And you sometimes have to reapply for tenure, which is a huge pain. So there's just a lot within the academic system that keeps you from moving. But it does happen very rarely.
Yeah, also by the time you apply to an academic position, you kind of know that's the path you want. You've gone through master's, PhD, postdoctorate, fellowship, whatever, all this. By the time you're there, like, I'm committed, right?
Yeah, like there are people who leave for industry and sometimes can transition back.
Yeah, I agree with Brad in the chat that university hopping is becoming more common, and especially in state universities, depending on if you get tenure track position, right, research position right away, because they also have a teaching track, which is less known.
That's a huge
Some people will be
difference.
like, yeah, I'll take the teaching track, and then I need to get to that position somewhere at another point in time.
Yeah, so if you're an instructor, it's a lot easier to move around. But
Right.
tenure track and tenured faculty, it's much more rare. It's more common than it used to be, but still pretty rare.
I can tell you my advisor from undergrad in Venezuela is now a full-time professor in Spain. So if you're helping countries, and then she got that job because of the relationship that she had during her tenureship in Venezuela. She was able to apply and get the job at a different country. So it's with the new very global world, it's not as crazy. Just make sure you have those connections.
Thank you so much for all of the questions that have come in the chat, and for our panelists for answering them.